And then you have another category of shrubs called the cane-growing shrubs. These are plants that renew themselves with branches that arise from the ground, directly from the ground. That would be things like bamboo and roses. And these are the toughest of the three categories of shrubs, cane growers. The pruning budget is large, and the pruning budget really is how much you can prune a plant and how hard you can prune a plant without getting into trouble. I would say that you can remove about a third of the foliage and reduce a plant maybe by a third of its height. And you do that usually by cutting canes to the ground. Cut those canes to the ground or sometimes 2 inches above the ground. A forsythia is an example of a classic cane grower that we manage if we so desire. Here again, you don't need to manage it if it looks fine to you, but if you would like to restrict the size and want a more perfect plant, you can do so by sawing or lopping out some of the canes to the ground or a couple inches off the ground every year. And when you do that, you take some of the canes from the middle because they're sort of clogging up the middle, and those are usually the ones that are too tall. And you also cut canes that hit the house or cross through the center. Inside every shrub, not just the cane growers, is Mr. Wrongway. He starts on the outside, and instead of going out to the daylight, he crosses back through the center and heads out the other side. So you want to look for Mr. Wrongway and lop or saw him out. Generally speaking, on many of these cane growers, you take out a few of the biggest, oldest canes and ones that are too skinny and wimpy and ones that are running into the shrub next to it. And you can also do some reduction cuts and as well as removal cuts, cutting canes to the ground. Nandina fits nicely into this category of cane growers. Nandina is also kind of a workhorse of the garden. It does a very fine job doing a very specific thing, which is to say it's tall and skinny, but it doesn't get too big, and you can prune it a lot. Another name for Nandina is heavenly bamboo. But it's not a real bamboo. It's not going to run and ruin your life. It's going to stay pretty well behaved, especially if it's the mid-sized one. Nandinas come in small, medium, and large, just like a lot of plants. Here's a picture of a Nandina, and here it is in that little triangular place where a rhododendron or a camellia would be too huge and would never look right. There's a little place on the front of every house between your walkway, your window, and your staircase, or porch and staircase, a little triangular place where everybody's always putting things that really resent pruning, things like rhododendrons and lace leaf maples that must get bigger and cannot be controlled with pruning. They should really put a Nandina domestica because they fit that space nicely. And they're evergreen. And there's a cute little story that goes with them. The story goes like this. In Japan, the male of the household comes home after a hard day at work, and instead of going in and taking out his nasty day on his wife, he sits down and tells his troubles to the Nandina at the front porch. And that creates domestic tranquility, as in Nandina domestica is its name. Isn't that a cute little story? So in a lot of gardeners' yards, you will see that Nandina at the front door. It's also the thing that can go along the fence, along the walkway, and it makes a kind of a evergreen, informal evergreen hedge if you need such a thing. But like everything else, people mal-prune them. Here are some Nandinas that are too thick because the guy shears them. I can get all these shots at my local bank. They're gone, and there's a new set of plants there now. Here's a Nandina that's too thin. This one is just suffering from bad culture, probably not enough water. Here's a bunch of Nandina balls. This is the short kind, and they don't deserve to be sheared any more than anything else. And here's a top-heavy Nandina. You see that a lot around here. after a few years and a few freezes, you tend to defoliate down towards the bottom and it all gets concentrated at the top. And this is not how we want it to look. We want it to look more feathery from top to bottom. So what pruning can help you fix this problem. If you have a top-heavy Nandina, as seen in the illustration on the left, the first thing you want to do is take out what I call the pegs, which are just little dead stubs, little dead bits of wood left over from when the foliage fell off. You'll see it. You go out and look, you'll see them. And you take your hand pruner and you very carefully clip all those off, and that really makes things look better. It's just amazing. And then you cut a couple of canes right to the ground, or sometimes an inch or two above the ground, and you whack some canes off to no place in particular. Well, actually, you do take them to a particular place. You take them to something that looks like a knuckle, and that's called a node by gardeners, and it's the place where dormant buds exist. But it looks just like a horrible non-selective heading cut that I told you not to make, except you want to create bushiness there. So we actually have a reason to do it. So you get very brave, and in the spring, or I guess in the summer, or maybe even in the fall, you would cut some of the canes to the ground, cut some of the canes off down inside, and in the future, a cane would arise from the ground, and it would also flush out from that cut that you made, and you get the Nandina on the right. You should know that you can also radically renovate a Nandina. That's also why it's in this category of easy plants to prune. I had some of these leggy Nandinas in my yard, and there was a camera crew coming to film some garden segment, and I panicked and did what any sensible person was. I just cut them to the ground and hid the foliage because I didn't want them to think I was a bad gardener. And sure enough, 3 months later, they had all regrown and looked better than ever. As with all radical renovation, however, you want to do it in a kind season. Around here, that means spring, and spring means pretty much March or April or maybe May. And you'd be surprised how quickly it regrows. Here's an example of some bad pruning. And I got to say, it annoyed me when I saw the grounds crew had done this, but then it also occurred to me, what's the difference between that and the pruning I just showed? And I guess one of the reasons is they just did an even cut all along the top, and it served no purpose because they looked pretty good beforehand. There was nothing wrong with the way they were. Had they staggered those cuts, then I would have known they were in the process of renovating their Nandina.